Yeah, evening. Jonah, Sarah, what's up? How you guys doing? Are you good? And they're not late? No bands today. No bands today. Yet. Anyway, I'm sure. We're always handing out bands, left and right. Just wrapping up work. Doing good. How have you been? Yeah, great. I've also just finished work. I'm doing all right. Yeah, work's been good. Work's been busy as usual, but fun stuff to work on, so can't complain. And yeah, did lots of drawing this week. Been live drawing. Been drawing in my sketchbook. So that's been good. And yeah, I go on vacation next week for 2 weeks. So looking forward to that. I'm going to take my sketchbook and just doodle loads of shit, read some comics. Yeah. Have a nice time, all that stuff. So it's going to be great. Do you hop on stream right after work, or is there a longer break in between? Like I literally stop work and then open up the streaming software, click go live, and then just make a cup of tea. Yeah, whilst all you guys come in, and then that's it. There's no break. I obviously I think about what I'm gonna do, and I kind of write notes and plan a little bit, but yeah, there's not like a break. If I had a break, like if I started at 6, and like finish work at 5 and start at 6, I think I would just like lose the energy and motivation. I'd just be like, let's go home. All right. So today, this is going to be much more of a, I don't know, let's call it, it's going to be a bit more teaching than and discussion, rather than like me actually, painting something. Because we're going to talk in depth about flow and composition. Initially through the lens of graffiti, because I think it is a nice kind of simpler way of understanding the more complex aspects of like picture making. And it's something that we can break down and you can sort of follow along and do yourself a little bit, so that you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. Because as I've said previously, like my interest in graffiti has been, since I was a young teenager, right? But it sort of helped me in a way to understand composition in illustrations, and I already had, from being interested in graffiti and like trying to work out the letter forms, that a sort of a sense of flow and composition, which then when I got into illustration, it sort of clicked for me and was like, oh, okay, like this is applicable here as well. And so then that's been a big part of my artwork, I guess, is there is a kind of sense of flow and composition to it. So that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of look at graffiti initially. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise together to sort of show you what those things are that we're thinking about. And then I'm going to go into like a ton of different artworks, both of mine and other artists and artists of the past. And we'll sort of look at the flow, and we can just have a bit of a discussion, ask questions about it, and but yeah, go from there. So it's a bit more of a like a interactive lecture or whatever, a lesson of sorts. So I've saved some pictures that I want to talk about, but in terms of like the detailed content of what we're doing, we're freestyling it. So that being said, there's going to be no old paintings that slap today, because I'm going to go through so many paintings that slap today. We don't need it at the beginning. So get wrecked, all right? So where do I want to start, really? As I briefly mentioned there, graffiti is something I got interested in. Yeah, whole stream's gonna slap. Got it. Yeah. Graffiti is something I got interested in as a teen. As you do, I saw it around the cities that I grew up in. Because I grew up in London, but I also grew up near Manchester. I went to high school near Manchester. So anyway, there's a lot of graffiti in both places. And yeah, just, there's a lot of things that get you kind of thinking it's cool or whatever. It's part of like music culture, and it's, I'd see it around a lot. And yeah, I enjoyed like sketching and drawing and stuff. And so graffiti just kind of piqued my interest as a teenager. And deciphering graffiti was like a big part of that, like looking at a piece on a wall and then actually trying to figure out what the word was quite interesting. And that really got me into the thing as a whole, and like, how to do it, how to make it, why, what are the rules of it? Like, are there any rules to it? And so on and so forth. So I want to try and like maybe give you that same kind of entry point that I had, because like I said, eventually down the line, this is what then made composition and illustration really click for me and become like a bit of a staple in my work, to have sort of like this idea of flow underpinning everything. And it's not that you have to go through this graffiti to get here. Other artists have come through and come about this in a different way. But this was, I guess, just my entry point into it. So yeah, I want to explain it through that lens. Yo, Yakino, what's up? Welcome. Late band. All right. So, and we'll start off with a little bit of an exercise here as kind of like our warm up and our lead into understanding this. And then we'll break down some graffiti, and then we'll start talking about paintings. So this is an exercise that can sort of teach you a little bit about, you had to help your mum. All right, well, your mum's band. Sorry. Okay, so, you look at a graffiti piece and you might be like, damn, like, where do you even start? Like, let's just quickly look at one. We look at this one and we're like, okay, but like, how do I even start to comprehend and break this down and think about what this even says, and everything? Like, you can appreciate that there's a lot of energy here, that there is like a composition happening, and there are, sort of flows and directions and currents, if you like, that are going through it. But like, in terms of breaking this down and even conceiving of starting this, we need to start like somewhere basic, right? And so all of this is to say that obviously graffiti is letters, okay? I was drinking almost spit. Your mum's band. Yeah, your mum's band. Yeah, sorry. Dangerous stream. Okay, so let's take a letter. We got the letter L, okay? This is like base letter form of the L right here. And you know, if we just went and wrote that on the wall, L, not very exciting, right? Go in here. So we can change this letter form, and the beginning of trying to understand what graffiti is all about is you know, understanding this letter form and changing it. Okay, so there are things that we can do to this L, many different things that we can do to it to sort of make this a little bit more exciting or give it a different look. You know, we could do something like this. Okay, you know, we could lean it back, do something like this. You know, we could even do something like this, for example. You know, we're still using the letter form, but we're like breaking it in a certain way. We're still using what puts it together. All right. So this is kind of one beginning we could look at, or we could look at sort of what happens in like fonts. Okay. So we might have something like this, where we have like, you know, these are called serifs. Dyslexia. There we go. We have serifs on letters, right? This is a way of stylizing it. But what if I was to then do that second stage that I did previously, where I take the letter form with serifs on it, and I start to, you know, experiment with maybe how that comes across. You know, we start to explore another kind of avenue of modification, let's say. Okay, so all this to say that essentially we can start modifying the letter. We're still keeping you know, these ideas intact, but we're sort of styling them up, and we're playing with the letter. We're opening it up, we're closing it, we're adding, you know, direction and flow and stuff to it, and so on. So let me take this letter here, and I'll do something like this. Okay, to my L. Now this kind of, well, actually, let's leave that to a side once. Now let's take this like the next stage further. We've got our L, okay, and using this base letter form, we create some blocks, and we turn that into, you know, a blocked out L. Now, what's to say that we do the same with this one? Okay, I take what I have here. Okay, and I just turn these into blocks. Okay, and I get rid of where those connect to the vertices there, and do something like this. You know, so I take the letter form, I block it, and in this case I took this letter form and I blocked it out. Okay, now we're starting to see, like, okay, this may be where we could start looking at how this turns into graffiti. Now, other stuff that gets added to graffiti are like extensions. So an extension, the best way I can kind of sum it up, an extension is sort of taking one of these directions that the letter has gone in and extending it to continue that energy in either the same direction or to start transmitting it into another letter or into a new direction. And extensions can take the form of basically anything you want. But, you know, in graffiti, you'll often see things like arrows. You'll see sort of extensions that echo kind of similar parts of the letter. You'll even see extensions that sort of come out of the letter and maybe travel around and do something like rejoining it at another point. Stuff like this. These are all extensions. Okay, and you'll see a lot of this in graffiti. And the reason for these extensions is stylistic, but also is to start to change and manipulate the flow of the piece letter to letter to create a composition, right? So before we get into kind of creating a really crazy letter, I want us to consider a kind of a simpler stage, something called a tag, right? You will have seen tags everywhere, every bus stop in the world, every train station. You know, there are tags. Tags are like the simplest form of graffiti. Is literally, you know, started off with people just writing their name or writing a word or a moniker that they're associated by, and it produces its own hand styles. And tagging is like a part of graffiti, but is literally at the same time its whole other sort of subgenre. But it is the building blocks for graffiti as a whole, right? So I briefly showed this at the last stream, I think. But if I take this word dank, okay, this is my teenage Alex right here, thinking like, what's my tag, yo? Like, what could my tag be? And I thought, dank's kind of cool, but I also liked the shape of the letters in dank, right? And I thought I could do a lot with that. And through countless sketchbooks, I came up with my tag, right? Which looks like this. Now, this is dank, but styling out the letters, and the styling out of it is basically done in such a way that I can connect it all in one smooth rhythm, so I can write it in one go with like a fat marker pen. You know, it's one sort of arm movement that I've, you know, still to this day, I haven't written this for years, right? But I can still do the letter form. And as you can see here, like this very static energy, right? Very like blocky up and down, just normal letters. But this has a lot of like energy and flow in the letters. Okay, there's all this kind of direction and energy to it. It goes from like thinner to thicker, and we have like a lot of fanning out from seemingly like a singular point, but then that energy changes across the word until eventually we get this big counterflow at the end. And you know, to me, this is very kind of visually appealing. And it also serves another focus, which is to draw a crown with the first two letters here. This symbol, the crown in graffiti, like this, is basically what like good graffiti writers will put above their pieces. We might even see it in some of the ones I've got. Or in tags. It's basically to say like, you're the king, you're the best, right? And the quotation marks are basically like, you're saying, this is me, this is my name, etc. Anyway, so this was something that I wanted to like get into my tag, because I was like, I'm the best, even though I did not go out and do like amazing pieces or anything like that. This is just my teenage brain. But anyway, I spent a long time in many sketchbooks with marker pens trying to get this composition to be something that I liked and enjoyed. and also felt good to write. You know, the sort of flow of this is really, really like nice for me, and the way that I do this, and I can replicate it over and over and over and over, and I can style it up in different ways, so on and so forth. But what I wanted to say here was that compositionally, this has energy. If we take into account the quotation marks and the underline as well, there is like undeniably a sort of an energy to this, where we can almost see that certain lines appear to sort of fan out from the same point, and that this energy changes across the piece with the introduction of the curves, and then eventually coming into this end portion where we have this counter curve to the whole thing, and then framed again with these, you know, and comes in thick to thin. So there is an sort of an underlying energy and flow present in this word and the way it's written, that serves both a sort of a pictorial purpose, but also this idea that I can write it in one go, all joined up with one hand, you know, and replicate it. It's a pattern, right? Overall. So we're taking something very simple and kind of, you know, let's say boring, and we're changing it into something that is visually appealing and has a sense of energy and composition to it. Okay, and that essentially is graffiti. Now, this is the very simple form of it, right? Tags can get very elaborate, and you know, just as much as handwriting can, right? But when you then go into doing pieces, so pieces are, you know, something like this, that's when this starts to get very elaborate, and we start to kind of knock on the door of techniques and things that you would see in illustration a bit more. So we'll do this quick exercise with a letter, and you guys can like follow along if you want, and then we'll talk a little bit more about graffiti, and then we'll get into some like paintings and talk about flow and stuff. But yeah, if anyone's got any like questions or anything at this point, put your digital hand up. And yeah, we'll start. We'll do the letter L, shall we? So we're gonna go L. Now I'll do the sort of steps up here. I'm gonna go L, then L, then we'll sort of copy paste this, and we'll do the blocks. Like that, and then we'll start messing with it properly, and we can start using all of our kind of design principles as well. So design principles are being like big, medium, small, you know, thick to thin, rhythm, or repetition, rather, etc., symmetry, all of that. Okay. And the other thing that we are kind of looking at is like extensions, so things that we can extend to that. So if I do my sort of base block out one here, so we got that stage 3 one here. Okay. What I can start to look at is like, actually, you know, maybe I want to do something whereby I'm playing with the thick to thin, the movement within this. So I'm going to do something like, make this block a lot thicker. And then continue that thickness going down here. Something like this. And then we go back up to thin. And then here I maybe bring this to a point. Okay. And what's nice about going thick to thin, which you would have heard me talk about a lot when I'm painting strokes and coming up with shapes in paintings, is that thick and thinness, it leads the eye, right? Your eye looks at it, and when it sees the tapering line, it follows those tapering lines. It's kind of like train tracks going into a distance, right? So if you can play with lines going from thick to thin, you are moving the eye, you are channeling the direction it's going, and you're creating like energy in a particular direction. As we go. So I'll keep rubbing these back and like adding more to this. I'm thinking about kind of some extensions here to these parts that means I can kind of mirror and redirect some of the energy from this to get a different flow, or at least change the flow. And if you have that book that I was talking about previously, the graffiti book, can't remember what its name is now, Style Fonts. There's a very good book for just looking through and thinking about this exercise. And like coming up with new alphabet street fonts, that's it. Nice one. Do I do any stylized logo design? No, I don't. Logos is like never really interested me, to be honest, in the same way that like graffiti has. And like fonts in general don't really interest me either. It's the pictorial aspect of graffiti that really kind of inspires me, It's taking letters and then turning them into like an entirely new picture almost that sort of transcends the letter itself. It becomes like a sort of a roller coaster for the eyes. And, part of it is like, oh, what does the word say underneath? Which is, kind of interesting. But on the other hand, it's like what the more interesting thing for me became like how the energy and like flow of the composition gets directed by this sort of current, and the way that the lines get sort of picked up and taken, right? So I've got this kind of L right here. It's getting more and more elaborate. Let's knock the opacity of that down. And we'll keep going. Mega Oreo, thanks for the follow. Welcome. Yeah, don't try and make it correct or anything right now. Like there isn't a correct, you know, the you will make stuff that is kind of ugly initially. You know, the other sort of principles of design that you need to consider still need to be within this to make it work. Like you do need an understanding of, like, again, big, medium, and small, and like direction. And you know, that kind of stuff. But you know, you sort of should be picking up on each stage, like on the energy that you create with the particular line. And then kind of flowing with that. And then there's something I'll like talk about as well on top of that when we get to it. So let me just draw into this a little bit more. And then I want to sort of talk through some examples. And like something that I used to think as well when I first got into graffiti was like, it's not readable. It's not readable. So like, what's the point? And like, the point of it isn't that it's readable. You know, it's artistic expression, and the word is just the basis for that. It's not like that you're supposed to be able to read it. It's not a book. You know, you can like get a good eye for being able to read stuff once you're kind of a bit more initiated, you know, into how graffiti looks and like the way people tend to sort of style things and so on. But it's not about being readable in the first instance. Now, some people, you know, they have a simpler style, and you know, they keep it readable, and that's just like a preference that people have, right? You know, they want that name to be recognizable, and so they keep the graffiti sort of simpler in that sense. But then you have other writers that will go like super wild style, which is like, this is approaching like wild style. Well, it's kind of wild style, where it's like the legibility of it is secondary to the sort of entire composition and energy that is within the piece. And you're sort of more looking at a collection of rhythms and such, and currents, if you like, than you are a word. And it's just, at least for me, and obviously people that love graffiti, that is quite an entertaining thing, is to, you know, have that. And it's sort of an endless inspiration for composition and flow within that. You know, we'd take such a simple thing like just a letter, and then through the manipulation of line and so on, and then eventually, you know, form, you create something entirely new, entirely different, that has like its own energy and like composition to it, and it's pretty fascinating, right? And where it starts to get really interesting is like when you add form into it, and you start to then get into the realm of like, you know, actual sort of three-dimensional stuff, and yeah, it gets pretty crazy after that. So let's have a look. We've got the craziest letter L going right here, and like we could keep adding more to it and so on. There's a lot of kind of inner workings and rhythm that we can do, and like obviously if you start adding color and then form into this, you're going to, you know, really start getting somewhere. But what this and we've got a single letter here, so let's go back to sort of teaching mode. We've got a single letter here, but you know, in graffiti it's a word, right? You're spelling a name, a moniker, a word, or just a collection of letters that you like the look of together, right? So a lot of these extensions and so on become about setting up rhythms and energy that you can pick up with the next letter along to connect it together. And this is where, if you're big brain, this is where the composition aspect of this starts to come in, okay? And where I'm heading with this. Okay, so this letter, we'll do like the base letter in here. Okay, the L is in here. Let's do this on a separate layer. Okay, got my L in there. And we've got a lot of extensions and rhythm and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm starting to do here is taking these aspects of the L, like so this part here, and I start to extend out these pieces as if they are coming directly from these origin points, right? So I've got this kind of repetition of lines and stuff that starts to echo out from these points. They're sort of like ripples in water. If I was to drop that L into some water, and then all of these are like ripples that flow out from it. And what these do is they set up new rhythms that the eye can follow. Okay? And, you know, and then each new shape that we get starts to set up like counter rhythms and so on. And these rhythms that start to sort of fan out from a particular point and change direction are what we can pick up on with our next letter. So let's say our next letter is, I don't know, like let's say it's an A, right? Like this. I can pick up on any of these rhythms. Let's do this in a different color. I can pick up on any of these rhythms that are coming out to start my A, right? So I might be like, slender name. Thank you for the follow. You know, I come out, I go down, I bring it up, I do this. And that's my A. Okay, like that. Now I've picked up on some of these rhythms that come out of this. And if I start to then, you know, build the blocks around this A and turn this into a letter, something like that, we can see, and I'll fill it in just so you can see. You can see here that I'm starting to pick up on rhythms that I set up here to make a new letter that's going to sit next to it like this. And this is kind of the basic letter. And then what I'm going to do is like add, more extensions that sort of take the rhythms of this letter and fan it out and so on and so forth to set up rhythms for the next one. And what this is going to do is like each letter is setting up the letter next to it and setting up the letter next to it till eventually you have an entire word, right? And that entire word, if you were looking at it as a whole, might have, a shape or a composition to it that, say, looks like this, with each letter playing a part in that rhythm as we go through. And this, to me, is very much how composing an illustration is. You have your elements of your composition that maybe you want to link together as a narrative, and you use this same idea with other items, posing, light shapes, all of that, to make this same kind of connection and flow through the illustration to give you a composition. So like everything is an echo or a ripple or a current that you're picking up on again, not necessarily exactly, but picking up on again to continue the motion that the eye is going to take through the image. And if you can tie that into then things that you want people to look at, then you are hitting on composition that is going to be very engaging to look at, and something that people are really drawn to. And I will show you some examples of this with some paintings, so you don't think I'm talking absolute shit. But this was the connection that I eventually sort of made with like why I find this so engaging and why I find like paintings so engaging, and making that link between those two was like, oh, it's the same thing. And so that's like a constant sort of thing in the back of my mind. Once I have an idea for a composition and the basics are out the way of like what's in it, it's then like, okay, how do I set this up? How does this play off this, that plays off this, that plays off this? How does this rhythm that I set up on over here resolve itself on the other side of the illustration? If it's a roller coaster, like what's the start, middle, and end of that? And in graffiti, this is the start, okay? And then we end up here where we're linking all of this stuff together and creating this echo and this ripple throughout the thing. So yeah, that's my big like aha moment with that. But we'll explore that now, and we'll talk about that some more. And we'll go through some examples of like some graffiti first, and then we got paintings to talk about, which I know that's probably the more interesting thing for you guys. But yeah, as you're listening, keep playing around with this idea. I want you to sort of really try and understand it. I think there's one thing for me saying, stuff like this, but it's another thing for you to sort of do it and see it yourself and like really pick up on what's happening. But you can start with something simple. So if you're gonna I don't know, we'll just Yep, you can start with just a word like this, laser, right? And with your, basic letter forms like this, you can even start to sort of get this idea of a flow going. And then, build these out as thicker letters, and so on. But you can see it already starts to have a shape to it, and then you just build it out. But honestly, do this exercise a lot, even if you're not interested in graffiti. This whole, I think graffiti sort of puts it into context in a way that is kind of easier to digest than having to do like an entire painting, of like Spider-Man or whatever. It puts you in a place where you can quite quickly kind of edit and mess around with a full composition, with the idea of like transferring energy from the first letter all the way through to the last letter, and even trying to come up with a pleasing shape for this composition overall. And this is where like extensions can come in to plug in gaps. Plug in gaps in here. So, for example, let's quickly look at this. Strong kind of energy going in this direction in a lot of the letters, right? Like this. But what we have here is like this nice sort of counter to the end. Okay, and we pick up a little bit of this in here and so on. But ideally, I'm looking at it and being like, I really want that kind of same shape echoed in the end. I want to like contain the energy of all of this in like this kind of shape. So what can I do? I can change the R, the end of the R, but maybe this is where I want to add like an extension when I'm doing my extensions in here, to this. So that the end of the R, comes up, down, and back like this. And this starts to give me that shape that I'm looking for. So, this is where graffiti can get real crazy, right? Is these extensions are used to sort of plug gaps or enhance the composition in a way that, we want, that the letter form doesn't necessarily give us, and you can just keep playing this out over and over with extensions and so on, and make the shape what you want it to be. But you can start to see in this that there's like, oh, okay, there is like an overall shape to this, coming in. And again, rhythms everywhere, but it starts to become like really engaging, I think, to look at. And it's a great exercise to do. And like I said, Street Fonts is an amazing book for this, because it just has every page is a new alphabet from a different graffiti writer. So you can see like all different types and styles of letters, and you can copy letters out of it as well, which is a really nice way of sort of trying to understand, how people are thinking, but also to pick up on like design principles that people are using. All the design principles is still something you need to bring into this. And that's where that book can become really helpful. And yeah, you can just take this in any direction. Also, shape language becomes really important. So you'll notice here that every letter, I'm now giving it a real spiky kind of design language to it. And because that's consistent letter to letter, it starts to bleed into it like a certain look and a certain style. Like it becomes very aggressive, right? And very like, almost looks like the Batman logo, but it kind of feels like a bit of like a, I don't know, just like aggressive and abrasive, right? But you could change that, and similarly, you could do something that's like you know, really gonna do what loser. Really bubbly. Like bubble writing. You know, and it's got a different energy and whatnot to it. But you do whatever. Style it up however you want. There are no rules in that sense. You could also do things where, you know, you have letters that seemingly follow the same rhythm. Well, like, why not join those two portions of the letter? Where's my eraser gone? There we go. Why not join those two portions of the letter together like you would in joined up writing, cursive, and, you know, create this whole other illusion of, like, you know, 3D letters going through each other, you know, all letters being all part of the same, you know, maybe they're all joined in some way, and you can make these rhythms like line up together a bit better so that you can join these letters and overlap them. You know, you'll see all of this stuff in graffiti and some of the examples that I've got for you, which I'll go into in a second. But my graffiti brain's like kicking in, and I'm like, must write laser. But yeah, this exercise, like I said, if you don't care about graffiti, that's totally fine. But this exercise is what really helped me to make the kind of brush strokes that I make, the kind of shapes that I make, the kind of flows that I have, is from doing exercises like this and looking at graffiti and seeing like, oh, okay, I like the energy and the flow to those shapes. And as I was showing last week, let me get up Pizza Parker very briefly. As I was showing last week, the entire design of this is predicated on the same sort of principles that we're talking about. You know, I took this piece of the arm last time and sort of showed that, and was like, yeah, essentially this is graffiti, right? And we'll do a bit more of that later, but you know, it informs everything I do in painting in some way, and like just the flows and shapes and styling of it all comes from this deep down, and just exercises like this where we're just sort of playing with the shape and form of all these letters, pulling them out, and yeah, just going into it. And this is my journey, I guess. But it super helped. Yo, men2112, thanks for the follow. And man, I wish I could stay longer. I fell on your stream on random, and I'm not disappointed. Your explanations are so clear and helpful. Have a nice rest of your day. Hey, no worries. Check out YouTube. All of the VODs for my past streams are saved there. This is stream number 49. This one will be there as soon as the stream's finished. The link's on the page that you're currently on. But yeah, thanks for dropping in. Glad you found it useful, and thanks for letting me know. It's nice. It's nice to be nice. Okay, I'm going to do like 2 more minutes of this because I'm getting into this letter now. Getting in. And then we'll look at some graffiti. Whenever I see the word laser, I can't help but think of Dodgeball when they're like going through the team and he's like, laser, blazer. You know, like introducing the Dodgeball team. And yeah, a whole other thing is like negative spaces, joining negative spaces up. You know, the sky's the limit when it comes to this stuff. And there's definitely like unpleasing graffiti where rhythms don't quite line up how you expect them to, or stuff like that. It's like, it's definitely not easy to make something that looks really good with a good amount of flow. It really isn't easy. But again, that's kind of quite enigmatic about graffiti as well. It's like, what am I missing? What's the trick? You know, where is the thing that I need to understand? And that's where like your design principles come in, and your taste, and you know, looking at other art forms and looking at other people's work, copying letters, you know, all that comes in. So I go, it starts to build up. I mean, you just keep going. You know, you add all sorts of stuff. So let's have a little look at some graffiti, shall we? Instead of me scribbling. Let's have a little butchers. So I've got some pieces to show you. These aren't, it's not, I haven't selected stuff that I'm like, this is the pinnacle. I've just grabbed some graffiti of different styles to show you. And different complexities as well, which I think is important. Here we go. So this here, you can cheat and look at the layers that I've got here, but you know, you could have a guess at what this is, and we'll kind of break it down, have a look at it, talk about the flow, and so on, and the sort of overall composition of these. We'll break a few of these down in this way. And I'll kind of point out what all the different kind of bits are, if you like. So we have this one. All right. And yeah, it's got a nice like flow to it. It's got a certain like styling to it, which gives me like a sort of old video games kind of like Worms almost kind of feeling to it, which I quite like. But yeah, the word in here, or the sort of the moniker, I should say, is guesser. Okay. And then obviously we've got like all these kind of extensions and stuff that go on in the letters, and like other flows. You know, the G really extends out this way, and so on. All these other bits. But yeah, you can see that the flow is such that it's like the G, the S, and the R. The E's are made smaller, and the G, S, and the R kind of run the composition. And there's kind of like a sort of a symmetry almost in this. So let's do this. It's like a symmetry in here, in this composition, that it feels like this, and then it's like, yeah, the G, the S, the R, they really kind of dominate in there. And there's just like a nice little flow that goes through the middle, which I quite like, where these letters, all the sort of middles, the important part of the letters, all like run together in this little block in the middle there. But as you can see, you can sort of outline this and start to look at the flows and the rhythms that sort of get picked up in here. Like I'll do sort of similar flows in the same color, so you can see what I mean. Okay, and you can see how there's like an echo and like a rhythm, if you like, that's coming from across the piece, where we have, you know, all these red lines. They set up a sort of a rhythm and an echo in this direction. Okay, and then the blue ones do another one, the black ones do another one, and it's these that are like, even though these letters are very different from each other, these rhythms that are being echoed across the piece and seemingly radiate out from like a similar area, right? All these red ones kind of similarly going in this direction, but it's like there's an origin point to them, right? And same with these. It's like, if you thought of this as like perspective in your illustration as well, another note. But all these lines radiate out from a similar place across the piece, and those ripples are what the letters are being like picking up on and forming, and you know, that's what is underpinning the composition, are these like threads that are weaved together and picking up on the energy and the current, or if you like, from the other ones and radiating out across the piece. And like good graffiti does this. It sets up a direction, and it could be a very strong direction, but then it will fan out and echo this through, and it will weave in with something similar from a different direction, and sort of all come together like a, you know, like a weaved basket. And this is what holds it together. And even though it's just a word, it has this kind of really crazy composition that holds it all together. Then obviously you've got the fade all the way through it, the outline, the kind of 3D block letters styling to it, and you have like just an entire form in and of itself, and it's very, it's very engaging. But this is what's happening in painting, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So that's this one. This is kind of fairly, you know, stylized, quite blocky, still quite easy to read. Okay, what about this one? Okay, this is kind of approaching something similar to what I was like sketching there before. This one is a lot more sort of obfuscated in its approach, and it really breaks up what plays with the letter forms quite a bit. But again, it has a different like energy and composition to it. It's like it feels a bit more, what's the word? It feels a bit more sort of like spread out and open, and like the current is different. Like when we do this over it, it's going to look very different to this. It's going to be a lot more like dramatic. So yeah, this one, just to break it down for you, I know everyone always likes to know, like, but what does it say? Okay, this one is K E S E. Kese. Or case, or I don't know how you pronounce it. But that's this one. And all of this here is extension off of the K. And the K like extends all the way down under here. And then there's a lot of extension off the L here to kind of balance out this side of the composition as well. But like if I just outline the K for you. Okay, the K is all of this. And then all of this is the K. There's a lot of extension going on in here. But yeah, so let's have a look at kind of the rhythms that get set up in here. We'll do like similar rhythms again in the same colors. So on. So as you can see, this tapestry compared to this one kind of much more like fanning out, okay, like a sort of a perceived direction in which those things are coming from. And then this one, there's a lot of like short, sharp directions and ripples and energy, and like in some cases some directions stronger than others, and so on. And I mean, it goes to show that, you know, this has a lot more kind of extension and embellishment to the letters, and therefore the energy becomes like a lot more chaotic, you know, and a lot more like cluttered in a way. It's not to say it's bad. It's just like, it's just a different expression, right? And you can tell that when you start to sort of look at similar directions and how they like stack up, that there's, you know, there's directions that have stronger energy, and there are some big counters that come in. Specifically, like these curves really counter like everything that the letters have throughout. But again, it's same kind of thing underpinning it, a current and an energy and so on. So let's take a look at, yeah, this one that we started with at the start, right? Much more the kind of style that I like in graffiti, this kind of wild style. Very like just energetic and lots of extensions and so on, but it is actually like simpler than it appears. There's just a lot of like embellishment to the letters, but I do like the composition and and the energy to it. So this one, for example, is M E A S 7 is their name. And as you can see, there's a lot of like extension and energy and so on. But yeah, this tends to be like more towards the sort of style that I'm like drawn to. But there's a lot of nice energy and rhythms here. There's a nice like symmetry to it, where it sort of has this sort of feel to it overall, you know. And there's a lot of like longer rhythms that sort of echo through it. And this is kind of something that I'm more drawn to, as opposed to like this, for example, where the rhythms are like shorter, sharper little stabs. Whereas this is like longer rhythms that, you know, coexist. And this is sort of something that I tend to try and set up in my paintings, is like longer rhythms. Sorry, I'm drawing them in the different direction there, but like these sort of longer kind of flows that sort of make their way through the piece. Feels a bit more like wind, you know. But yeah, these kind of things, much longer. Seemingly two sort of forces colliding in the middle is what it kind of feels like, this piece. And it has that kind of symmetry to it. You know, it's like two waves smashing into each other, or like, you know. And I like that energy about it. And that shape, I think, is what draws me to it as well. There is, to me, when the piece has like an overall shape and sort of design to it that my eye latches onto, I feel like I enjoy the piece a lot more as well. And again, like when I outline the letters on here, you'll notice, especially as the pieces get more complicated, that actually if you look in the middle of the piece, a lot of the time, the letters are going to sort of line up together in the same way that if I just wrote this like this, you know, the middle here, maybe there's whatever this is called in a font, but like everything lines up on that, like the flat of the S, the middle of the A, the middle of the E, the bottom of the M, all of that stuff lines up. And like a lot of the time in this really complicated graffiti, this still holds true to a certain degree. There might be like a flow, you know, there might be like a flow through a piece where like, you know, all of those letters line up on something like that. But you would generally find that on like pleasing ones, at least to myself, that yeah, these things all tend to happen in a similar place. So it's like that is still happening throughout the piece here. So just something to bear in mind if you're looking at trying to decipher some like graffiti in your local area. Look for the middle, and you start to sort of pick up on, okay, where the letters are, and what's going on here. But yeah, really nice piece, this one. I think I like it for a lot of reasons. You can see even here with the sort of clouds that they're doing here, they're sort of picking up on this idea that like, oh, this is moving in this way, this is moving in this way, and they've kind of like bumped into each other in the middle. Poof. Again, very cool. Lots of energy, great composition. So let's move on to something that's like real crazy, where we start to introduce a lot more form, and it's like less complicated in one way, but more so in another way. So this guy, it's kind of like minimalist, wild style that sort of borders on like a lot of architectural stuff and like form. When I saw this kind of stuff when I was younger as well, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, just the illusion of form and like it, but the three dimensionality of it was just very engaging for me. This, you can type this guy's name into Google. Dame, very kind of famous graffiti artist, very known very much so for this style of painting, and yeah, it's very like mind-bendingly 3D, if you like. Really interesting shapes and interactions, but it's very different to say something like this. This still, although it gives the impression of kind of three-dimensional elements overlapping, you know, the sort of thickness to it, it doesn't quite move over into the same idea of form that this does, where we're actually playing with like the illusion of real objects and real light, and it has this sort of trompe l'oeil feel to it. Yeah, exactly. Lucius knows. Yeah, it has this kind of feel to it. And yeah, this can be obviously pretty exciting, pretty fun. And, you know, what's also fun with something like this is, like, you don't need to design the form when you make this. Like, let me just outline one of these letters, right? The letters are very simple. Oh God, it needs to do something. I think this is what I kind of quite liked about this when I first came across it, was that the letters, if you just outline them, are very simple. My only work experience is both through concept work and being skate culture. Yeah, skating. Yeah, bruh. So the letter itself is very simple, okay? But as soon as you start to introduce some kind of shading on the inside of this, you can do some mad shit. Which is obviously what our friend Dame is doing here. You know, just by the way you shade it on the inside, you can give a much different impression of the letter. You know, you can do some real crazy shit. You know, manipulating how the eye sees the form of this, and seemingly do some like impossible stuff. Bend it in ways that you're like, wait, which way is that going in space now? So I think this is what's like, at least for me, it's quite engaging about this sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, the letters are simpler, but then the form takes over, and the form is then the thing that we're playing with inside the letter and how that interacts with other stuff. If I take the the outline off of that, you see what I mean? We're like, what the hell's going on here? We can really enter another realm where it's all about form and the interaction of form, and that's what Dame is doing, essentially. Internal flow. Yeah. And you can, again, the letters are very simple, but then it's the way that those forms and surfaces interact, like the surfaces are intersecting each other seemingly, and like going through and around each other in kind of impossible ways. And that becomes like the thing about it, as opposed to the two-dimensional aspects of that, which is like this, where it's like, okay, this is just dealing with the flow overall of the shapes and contrasts, and that's how it's leading the eye. And this is doing something completely different in a much simpler letter form. There's really nothing complicated about the letters here. There isn't much embellishment, really. You can, for the most part, kind of see them. And it's all about form. So that's really interesting. And then, the last thing I wanted to show you is like where all of these things come together. And it's like we have this stuff. So this is going to be quite difficult for you to kind of make out. But this is just a building that has had this painted on it to give the illusion of it going in and out of the building and being a separate space. And it's kind of madder than you think as well. This alcove, I outline things in red. This alcove doesn't exist. Okay. Just put that there. This inner space is just a flat wall. Okay. This is just a normal doorway, like a flat doorway. And this is also like a flat surface here. Okay. You're looking at like a very simple few corners of the outside of a building. If I just do it like this. There is a corner here. There is a corner here. Like this. Like this. And there is a door. There is a vent. Okay? And that is all the geometry there is here. So all of this stuff is painted. This stuff is going just over a flat wall, but has that kind of illusion of perspective. Let me show you the piece fully again, so you can appreciate it a bit more. And then obviously the whole thing is painted to be kind of like a almost sort of reflective balloon type, metallic material. Yeah, the cast shadows as well. The longer you stare at it, the more you can be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And like the transparency here with the edge of the door frame. There are things that give it away, like kind of wonky lines in places and like shadows maybe being a bit too dark. But to be fair, it's fucking sick. And again, this is just a whole nother like level of that where you're playing with form as well. The letters themselves are not exactly complicated. Okay. Got O D E I T H. But then we're playing with everything else. Materials, perspective, form, all of that to bring together to make this kind of composition. Pretty sick, right? Alrighty. So, now that I've had a look at all different sort of types and styles of graffiti and how graffiti artists use the letter form to create flow, to connect other letters to build a composition which in itself is a picture. Now that we've kind of gone through that understanding together, we'll move into like the second part of all of this, which is how is this important in any way to illustrations. And so I want to start breaking down some paintings to illustrate the flow of them, and then we can see the similarities there, and then building off of that, what we can then do within the painting itself to sort of turn that more into like an underpinning for narrative elements. But before we do that, I need to use the bathroom very quickly, and I just need to re-up on a hot drink. So you're going to give me 2 or 3 minutes to sort all that out, and then we'll be back for the second half. Do not leave. All right? It's about to get more relevant than it's ever been. Okay? We're going to look at some paintings from the past. We're going to look at some of my sketches and paintings so I can break down my thought process. And we're going to look at some current day artists' pictures that I think you'll all enjoy. Some really good works, and go through those and point out the flow, so you don't just think it's all in my head. Someone else made those works. It's in their head as well. All right, I'll be right back. 2 minutes. All right, I'll leave you on this so you can study this a bit more. All right, be right back. All right, nice. I'm back. Hot drink acquired. We're back in the game. We didn't lose anyone. That's amazing. Everyone's here. Well done. I know that it must have been difficult. All right. So now we're going to get into like tying this into real paintings and illustrations, and showing the connection, I guess, that between the flows in graffiti and longest 2 minutes of my life. Yeah, the flows in graffiti and the flows in illustration, and why trying to like use graffiti as an exercise in understanding flow can help you to sort of build that same idea in your illustrations, in your paintings. So we'll start with some works from antiquity, some older works here. This is John William Waterhouse, Hylas and the Nymphs. Beautiful painting, very, very nice. And let's now break down the flows in this composition, and talk about them. Okay. So we have certain flows present in this. Let me get my favorite brush for flow. Yeah, we have a lot of flows in this. Okay, we have a lot of stuff that is set up, you know, through contrasts in the piece, like flows in the piece, but also like implied flows, like things that line up and sort of touch. So like this direction being this direction going through here. You know, we've got a lot of things that kind of line up on these lines. Lily pads, the breasts here, the shoulder, all the way up to the head. We've got like these rhythms set up by contrasts. This, the top of the hair, you know, all of these kind of rhythms that ebb and flow out of here. I'm just sort of picking up on where my eye is sort of hitting with these. I'm just outlining them, and we can have a look at them, right? And then anything that's like really counter to this, we'll put in a different color. But I'm just letting my eye sort of go around and see what I kind of pick up on. Okay, so let's talk about flows here. Obviously, this interaction here is you know, this kind of this touch, this meeting of the gaze of the nymph and Hylas right here. This is like where we're meant to feel the emotion of what's going on from here. Okay, this is an important thing for the narrative. Rats on radio, welcome. This is an important thing for the narrative, and you know, its placement in the composition and where it is meant to be something that we as a viewer need to pick up on. Okay, Hylas is going to basically get pulled in. Spoiler alert: he's gonna get drowned by the nymphs. Right? they're pulling him into the water, never going to see him again. This is something we need to get narratively. We need to understand this in the picture. So we need our attention driven there. Okay? And so there is a lot of rhythms, and we can also do eye lines as well, because that is important, but it's a different kind of rhythm. Okay? But there are all these rhythms that we can see that are set up to kind of pull the eye in a certain direction. Okay? There is this sort of large wave-like motif that is being echoed in directions and rhythms in the piece to sort of pull us into this area, this interaction where we need to see. All right? And there are things as well that are kind of either setting up somewhat the perspective and depth of the image, or they are countering this rhythm to a certain degree. So we've got near the corners, or at least in 3 corners of this illustration, we have these verticals, right? And they're almost like blockers, right? In a way. They're like little markers that are to be like, hey, no, don't go close to the edge. Like, stay in, you know? We've got all these rhythms here. Stay for this, okay? Stay in the picture. Don't come out. Like this one sets it up and then points you back in. These ones are just like a hard block for the corner. Same here. These guys are running defense for the corners. Don't want your eye to leave, okay? Everything in red, though, lines up to kind of pull us in. So that's like the main current, the main flow. Then we've got the eye lines, which if you have human faces in a composition, you know, we're humans, we look at those. If that face is doing something, i.e. looking in a certain direction, looking at a character or whatever, that has its own draw for us as people to help us, you know, guide out where we should look in the illustration. But it sort of in a way can trump any other sort of device that you might use. So you could use like contrasts of value, of saturation or whatever. You could design shapes to go in a certain direction, but you know, if you've got a character looking in a certain direction, we're going to look at what the character's looking at, right? But yeah, what I kind of want to illustrate here is that in the same way that in some of the graffiti pieces we looked at, there is that kind of tapestry, that weave that echoes through the piece and has a sort of a flow to it, and where it interacts is where the things are happening. So in this case, where these overlaps happen is where the letters are getting built. Similarly, in this painting, we have stuff where we have a flow, and then we have interaction with that flow and that ripple that slightly counters it, but it's all in a way to sort of draw us in. You know, there is an underlying current to this, and it's sort of telling us what to do. And in this way, you know, we have these things that block the corners. That's also being like, nah, stay in. Back over here. Get on one of these. Get on the blue line. Blue line takes you over. Where are we? We're here. Okay. Or you've gone here. You look down. You follow it down. You get onto one of these green ones, and we're back in. Or you follow the eye line, and we're back in. You see, anywhere you look, it's like, oh, the edge of that, the edge of this, and we're back. You know. You're afraid your brain is too small to apply to your own art. The thing is, it's going to come in stages. You don't wake up one day and decide that suddenly you understand and can do all of this. The first step to you being able to apply this in your artwork is to start looking for it and trying to see it yourself. And taking a painting like this, or doing this exercise that I've been showing you with graffiti, and get into your psyche this idea that it isn't random, the choices that are being made in graffiti and paintings to move the eye around. Once you're like ingratiated into the idea that there is an underlying property, an underlying narrative, an underlying design to the way that things are arranged in good paintings and good illustrations, once you kind of accept that idea and you start looking for it, that's when you can start to adjust small portions of your own artwork, and you are consciously aware of it while you are doing it. And the more you do it, the more practice there is. And you're going to run into problems as you do it. One of those problems is that you understand this, and so you contrive the entire image to have that flow. And what I mean by that is, let's say we've picked up on this wave, but imagine that everything in this picture was doing this flow. Okay, so I'm talking like you can't even have a lily pad facing this way. You're going to do it like this, and every other lily pad is then starting to do this in the illustration and all face this way. Every blade of grass faces this way, all these bits face this way, all this kind of stuff. Like all of these lily pads face this way, every hairline, she's got that behind her ear, it's facing this way. Going behind her shoulder faces that way. This is going that way. She's pulling her hair out this way and it goes this. Do you see what I mean? You could contrive everything to point at this, and it would feel really uncanny, like really quite creepy in and of itself. And like the whole world is like magnetized to this portion. And then it has like the opposite effect of being a subtle guide for the eye. And then it's like, holy shit, like, is this guy the center of the universe kind of thing, right? There is an art to understanding it, and there is an art to being subtle with it and guiding the eye where you want it without putting it on rails and being like, you're on a roller coaster, It just takes time and practice. I, at one point in my life, was unaware of this stuff, and over years of practice and looking for it and being told it's there and being shown it and so on, eventually I start to do it in my own work, and then I'm at where I'm at today with it, where it's like almost second nature. It becomes part of the things that it's one of the things I check off as I'm making work, is like, ooh, what's this flow? What's this? Do you plan those lines and put the elements of the piece, or put the elements first and then adjust? That is a good question. For me, I have to get the elements in place first. I have to put all of my things on the page, all my characters on the page, and let's say there's clouds and some hills, okay, and some grass. I have to get all of that on the page. Then I ask myself, okay, what is the narrative? Like what is the thing here? How do I better tell that? And the narrative here is that middle guy in the blue is like some all-powerful being, right? So I then think, okay, well, let's make this so that I'm going to see him from a low angle, and I'm kind of like looking up at him, and these other two people who are just normies, they're either side of him and they're looking at him, okay? And that's kind of like stage one. That's like, okay, that's the narrative. Then I look at these sort of environmental factors, and I'm like, okay, well, could I show this by, in some way having the clouds above him, start to encircle him in this way, and maybe I can, slightly alter the landscape so that there is some subtle pointing into this, you know, and start to add a little bit of this stuff. And I go through sort of doing that, and then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is working. This is kind of doing the thing. It's still kind of like subtle enough. Can I set up some other flows in here? Like maybe they have some drapery, and that starts to, you know, funnel the eye in a bit. And you can go too far until you've like literally contrived the illustration. So then you can dial it back a bit, or, you know, maybe you haven't gone far enough and you're like, oh, I could do a bit more in here, and, you know, pull in flows from everywhere and sort of set up that rhythm, and so on. But it starts with getting it on the page first. Just get it out there. Then narrative. What am I trying to get across? And then how can I adapt the illustration and the way things line up and the flows to better do this? Can the guide be too subtle for the average person? I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm sure it can. I mean, I don't think the average person is going to get a painting like Hylas and the Nymphs and draw over it and be like, yeah, where is my eye drawn to? You know, and do that. This is much more, I guess, on the side of like, you make pictures, you're interested in this stuff, you want to sort of understand the underpinning of this stuff a bit more. Yeah. All right. Okay, I've got 40 minutes, so I'm gonna sort of chunk through a few of these kind of fairly quickly. But this one works on a sort of a similar thing to one of those graffiti pieces, right? Where, so this is Souls on the Banks of the Acheron, okay? And in this piece, this guy, I can't remember his name, but he basically sails the souls of the dead over the Acheron so that they can enter the underworld, okay? Otherwise, you just be a lost ghost, right? So these are all the souls waiting on the banks of the Acheron for Charon. There we go. Thank you, Lucief, with the with the hot knowledge. I like it. I'm terrible with names. So yeah, this guy, he's the Don right here. He rules. Muchi, thanks for the follow. And in a way, this composition has a sort of a flow where it's like a wave hitting a wall and coming back in to this. It's one of my favorite paintings. I love this painting. But yeah, there's this idea that he is like a sort of a solid structure, like a wall, right, in this piece, and that this is like a wave that is breaking on him, and, you know, or breaking against the side of the illustration here, and there is this like flow to the way that everything is arranged in this that does this, with him being like a very like stalwart, kind of solid character. You know, he, you know, actually has a horizontal and a vertical that match up with the frame of the picture. And I think this is the only thing that of this size does this in the painting. And this sets him up narratively, but and you know, pictorially, as like a structure and strength and a focal point in an otherwise like flowing you know, place. So like all of the souls are these kind of flowing, kind of ephemeral, you know, lost souls on the bank of the Acheron, and he is like this solid structure, this figure in the middle that they all want to, you know, that they all need to interact with to get across the river, right? And even these other characters here, that are seemingly standing up are being sort of buffeted by this wave. You know, this guy with his head leaning back and everything has these kind of flows where this very strong direction that everything else is moving in, even though he's standing up, is kind of pushing him in this way. This lady's literally being pushed backwards in space, you know, except our dude here, you know, and this is that connection where it's like the illustration has a narrative, okay? The characters being presented need to be presented in a certain way, okay? So the shape language and the underlying design of the illustration also carries this message in its simplest form, right? We have the dead, we have the lost, we have the ephemeral, right? And we have the solidity, the lead, like, you know, the leader or the structure in here. And the way that they are depicted is underpinned by the design of the illustration, not just what's going on in the picture itself. Just on an abstract level, you know, on an abstract level, this guy is a block, right? And everything else is bending around to this, okay? And there's tons of flows going on in this. They're not all going in the same direction. There's kind of, again, they're like fanning out from a point and echoing around. And there are lots of little like counterflows and eddies and, like, you know, like there is in a river going around pebbles. There are lots of little things that kind of counteract, you know, the overall motion. Okay, not everything is going in that direction, but that's what makes it feel very natural and like watching water in a stream. It's all going in one direction. It's all going downhill, right? But it's going round rocks and it's going under rocks and it's going around this twig and it's, you know, but it's all going the same direction in the end. It's the same here. And that's what I think helps to kind of... You need to understand that you don't want to contrive it. If the water is all going downhill, it's just going down a slide, you know? And that direction is very clear and it's very obvious, but it's also very like static in a way, very boring. And, you know, for the thing to work, it needs to have a strong sense of this, but there needs to be little kind of eddies and whirls and pebbles and stuff along its way that create, you know, just little portions where your eye's going to go off track and notice other things. But overall, it's just going to keep coming back to the main rhythm and draw you in again to the main point. All right. And then, so that's just on a flow aspect of this, the underpinning design. But then, you know, there's other things in this that help to fulfill this idea that we need to look at this guy. Okay. We have things like this geometric shape put behind his head. Okay. This is like a perfect circle in something that is very flowing and natural altogether. So again, it's contrast. Okay. We also have a contrast of value. We basically have white next to black, next to white, next to black here. So lots of contrast there. We also have, you know, this big dark shape in a seemingly much lighter sort of sea of other shapes. We also have the only lady in this that has any sort of real saturation to her outfit and her hair is holding on to our main focal point here. So again, we've got a contrast of like deep, dark, kind of fairly unsaturated blue next to light, very saturated blue. We've got that little pop of red. He also has kind of saturation in his face here. But, you know, this is where that's playing out. Everything else, fairly muted in comparison. all the souls, they've lost all their coloring and so on. There's all these contrasts here that I just pointed out that are in the exact same place that all of the flows are leading us to. So the flow is there to kind of subtly show us the direction, but then what we're hanging onto that flow is all of the contrasts. We're stacking them to then draw the eye to that point even further. And when you have all of this together, then you have an illustration that is telling the story by leading the eye to where it wants you to go, and by stacking contrast to kind of keep you there and keep that being the most interesting part of the illustration. So that when you ask questions about this, when you look at this painting, okay, and you're drawn in, and you get to a point where you very quickly your eyes here, and you stop, right? This is how we look at images. We kind of look, we go around, and then we stop at a point, and then you're like, what am I looking at? Like, and why am I looking at it? That's when you look at his facial expression. You look at his hand. He's got the staff, that determined look on his face. You notice that he's not dead like the rest of them. We start asking questions at the most important part of the illustration, which is going to then lead us to start answering like what's going on in the illustration. And if we are not asking questions at the point, the most interesting part of the illustration, right, that we've been drawn to, then the narrative is not going to be conveyed very well. If the first thing that I started asking questions at was like this here, I'm going to lose what's going on, okay? If this lady had bright red hair, right, really saturated hair, really insane contrast between the white of her skin, okay, and like really dark shadows, something like this, and she had a literal circle around her head. Like this. Okay, and then I'm looking at the illustration. My eye goes here. I start asking questions like, what is this about? And I don't get any of these answers from this part of the illustration because it's not important for the narrative. So drawing attention here is only going to obfuscate the narrative. So when you have a narrative in an illustration, what you want to do is initially establish what that narrative is, which you do from the very start. You get the elements that are important to that narrative on the page. You then start to think about how can I arrange the elements of this painting to draw the eye where I want the viewer to look. Then I stack as many contrasts as I can within reason, within the illustration at that point to keep your attention. And then when you are looking at that part of the image and you've paused to look at it, you start asking questions about the image. You are going to figure out the narrative because you're looking where the narrative is happening. So when I look at artworks, of people that are learning and so on, this is often the part where they have an illustration, they have set up good flow, okay, to their focal point or what they want to be their focal point. But then they put all of their contrasts and like saturations and value contrasts and shape language, and they do it in such a way that it obfuscates the kind of the flow that they've set up. Or they do the other thing where they don't have the flow, but they've stacked all these contrasts somewhere, but the shape and design of the composition doesn't lead me to that point, and therefore I'm asking questions about the wrong part of the illustration, and the narrative doesn't come across. And it's kind of like flow is a flow or let's say the underlying rhythm of the composition is a sort of a hanger on which to hang all of these other elements. And in narrative illustration, it's very, very kind of useful thing to do. So there you go. That's okay. So these are paintings of antiquity, right? Fine. I don't know how much time have I got. I've got 28 minutes. There's a couple of paintings that I want to like finish with, and I'm trying to think what's the best way of going about these. So let's talk about this, because this is a sketch of mine of a painting that I have no desire to finish, but I wanted to bring this one up because I think it's not a finished painting and it's at an early stage, but this is at a point in the illustration where I have got the idea out and I have started to mess around with the composition and the flow to start to do what we've been talking about, like to try and set up rhythms and flows and so on. But it's just like still at a very early stage in the sketch that a lot of that stuff hasn't been refined, but where you can see that I don't just immediately put something down and go like, yeah, boom, that's the flow. That's done. You know, it is something that I sort of hone into the image more and more and more as it comes in. So thought this might be a kind of handy thing to look at in that sense. So here, this image was, I was coming up with a sort of an idea of a sort of champion for League that is like a puppet master of sorts, and that he makes like dolls, and that these dolls are kind of in some way alive, and like as a champion he would control them like a puppet master kind of thing. And I was just making up a champion idea to do a splash art for, essentially. But what I wanted was essentially him to be a bit of a heartthrob, right? His sort of, demeanor was that he makes these like puppets, and he's like he's a skilled craftsman, but he's like quite sort of young, and he's a bit of a thirst trap, basically, just because I thought it would make for an engaging splash artwork. So I had this kind of idea in my head of like his character, and he's in his workshop, and he is pulling forward like one of the puppets that is kind of work in progress, and he's just sort of looking at it. And in some way I wanted it to feel a bit like we don't know if this puppet is alive or not. Like, we don't know if he's just pulled it forward to look at it, or if it was like talking to him and he's now pulled it forward. Do you know what I mean? Like, there should be this like weird quality about it. I also wanted him to feel like a bit sort of cool and a bit kind of like Set, the other character from League, where he's just kind of like cool, laid back, kind of chilling in his place. Again, he's just a sexy man, right? So initially I had thought of the pose, like, yeah, I'll have him slumped in the chair and he's looking at the puppet, and so on. And at this stage of the illustration is where I started to think a bit more about the rhythms I was setting up. And again, like we were looking at with the Acheron one, is like, how do I get his character to come across not just from the pose, but the sort of design of the piece. So, we're looking at this interaction being the thing that we need to look at, but also I liked this idea of him being like very sort of cool and like laid back, right? So there's sort of this sort of underlying rhythm that I was trying to get with him, where he's like as horizontal as you can get basically without lying down, and that there is these kind of rhythms in the piece. You can see them with some of the sketchy lines that are still in the piece, that I was trying to sort of elongate out his rhythm, his flow, to be like, you know, like this, and echo it out, so the chair sort of comes around like this, the edge of the chair, these portions of it, her arm, this kind of thing. This whole area is still like very unresolved in the sketch at this point. But basically this idea that the interaction that they're having is kind of like rippling outwards into the rest of the illustration, but it has this like very sort of lazy, kind of laid back feel to it. Like his pose is, you know, is quite sort of lazy in and of itself, but then the kind of the ripples and the echoes of this in the flow of the piece kind of echo that. You know, I also thought again about the contrived nature of this as well, that if everything's doing this, even the cushion he sits on, it's like it gets a bit much, right? And so I had previously had this cushion that he was sat on. I had previously just had that kind of like this, and he was sat in it like that. But I decided, like, actually, let's counter the rhythm a little bit. Could we set up like a lot of those already? So let's have his weight in the middle of the cushion like force the corner up. So this kind of points into that rhythm a little bit, so it breaks it a little bit, and that just is like uncontriving it slightly. You know, there are points where like the hand was further back and it was like this, but it was like the exact same angle and such as the head. So I started to think about, okay, well, if I move the hand forward and like set up this kind of thing, it starts to help these lines, like it's like they all converge towards a point, you know, which has a certain energy to it. You know, it's just like they move in that upward direction, and maybe you could think about that as like the puppet master with the strings, you know, just like going on. This part of the illustration as well is something that I was thinking about, where it's like I wanted it to almost feel like she was underwater in a way. So there's like all these like weird flows with the hair, where it's like, you know, if someone's underwater and the hair's like moving around. So it feels kind of ethereal. So it's like, oh, is this doll actually just an automaton, or like, is it kind of alive already? And you can see here that with the sort of sketchiness of this, her dress was also going to sort of flow out and so on. But these were all decisions that I was sort of at this stage stopped moving the illustration forward and just started to like sketch over it and over it and over it, and just was like, oh, I could move this, I can move this, I can move this, and so on, and just sit in it for a while, you know, and go in. And if I was to take over this illustration again, like I would start again by like drawing over the main parts of it, and just thinking like, okay, well, where can I take this? You know, what other things, what other rhythms could I bring in, and so on. So, yeah, again, I just wanted to show you a kind of an earlier stage sort of thing there. Alrighty, so next up. And I realize I've got like a ton of my works here that I was going to go through and talk about various elements of, and it's not necessary to go through all of them. But I did want to get on to I did want to get on to looking at some works that are not mine, to show you that whether other artists got to this through graffiti like myself, or they got it through like looking at older works, or someone else told them, or whatever, that it's not just like this is something that's going on in my head. That these things are true of, you know, really good works of art. And I thought it might be a little bit more interesting as well for me to like break down what I see in someone else's work that I believe holds true. So I think tomorrow, if people are still interested in the topic more, I can like talk about like this piece and some of the other ones of mine that I had brought up here. But otherwise, there's a couple of pieces that I wanted to look at from other artists. So I'm sure most of you know who Esben Rasmussen is, okay? And I'm sure you've all seen this artwork of Yone from League of Legends. And this piece is, you know, works in the same way that like Hylas and the Nymphs does, as this does, in terms of using flow to guide the eye to the point in the illustration that you need to be looking at, to then ask questions to like understand the narrative, or just be in the spot that is meant to be the most important part of the illustration, right? And I think without me even drawing over this to show you flow, it already oozes flow, right? There is so much flow and design of flow in this illustration that with just looking at it, you feel like your eyes are on the journey, right? They are wrapped up in the eddies and whirls and flows. There's even actual wind that's going through this that is helping to carry the eye around. But it is a real treat of like flow and direction and, you know, counterflow and all of these little things. So I'll draw a few lines over it, and then I want to talk about something else about it as well. But this is mainly to serve the purpose of going over a really amazing piece of art by an amazing artist and lovely guy, but also to show you that this stuff is not the ramblings of a madman. You know, there is method in this madness. It exists outside of me. But let's see. Okay, there's all these like lovely flows within Yone himself, right, that are directing us up in this direction. Okay, all of this. But then there's lots of these other flows, these like beautiful sort of counter flows and eddies and directions that aren't necessarily drawing us here, okay, immediately, but are supporting this idea that we picked up on in the graffiti, where it's like there are flows, there are counter flows, and there are like the weaving together of these things, and there are like ripples outwards from these shapes that set up other shapes. So you can have things that counter, but then you pick them up elsewhere, and these like, you know, these ripples change, and then they hit something else, and they bend around it, and that sets up the next thing and the next thing. If everything's going in the same direction, you don't have anything to set up anything else going in a different direction. Okay, you need shapes that counter your main shapes to set up the idea of having a different direction in the piece. And you know, you can set up places where those things crash into each other. You can set up where those things subtly turn into a shape going a different direction. But you need to set them up by having these counter movements. You can't just like have everything go in the same direction and then suddenly change direction without it being a focal point. Like if everything was going one direction, like this, okay, in the illustration, like all the lines go this way, and then I put one line like this, and it's not what I want you to look at, because I've set up this like crash of flow, this becomes important. So if I want to have an illustration that has lots of things in it, you know, this building, this mask, this building, him, the swords, the flow of his drapery, all of that, I need to have things that counter those flows and kind of ease my eye into seeing that flow that's going a different direction. Otherwise, I'm going to have a contrast where I don't want one. So it's important to counteract the flows, to set up the possibility of having other things in the illustration moving around, because you don't just want everything going in the same direction. There are things like the outfit, the fact that it's a person. All of these things are going to mean that you're going to have counters. So if you contrive the illustration to all move in one direction, you're going to end up putting contrasts in places that you're going to draw the eye to and you're not interested about. So there's got to be a certain amount of rhythm and give to this that sort of, you know, counteracts it. I'm just kind of picking up on things in here and just putting different colors on so that we can see them, but they're not necessarily going all the same direction with these different colors, right? But you can start to see that certain things just like ripple across the... You gotta go? Goodbye, Yukino. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. And I'll unban your mum. But let's see, look, these kind of things, they sort of like ripple out across the illustration in a way, and then like these things counter that ripple, but then they set up things moving in a different direction, you know, and I'm just sort of bouncing that rhythm around as you see it, right? So that's why you need that variation. I'm not even looking at the clouds here, but the clouds are all doing this as well, and then we got the moon. Okay, so this is about flow, the rippling of it, setting up counters, setting up other flows to latch onto and talk about. And the reason, like I said, being that you are going to set up, you're going to have contrasts in your image. If you don't have the ripple of that elsewhere, you're going to cause a contrast where you don't want it. Got a dash. Super interesting. Love more insights like this. Thanks, Alex. Have a good evening. And yeah, welcome. All right. So what's that to say? That here we do have a very sort of strong, again, like rhythm that points us towards the head, okay? Or the character in general, like all of these shapes, okay? Don't need to like harp on that point, but like this is all happening. But then what's happening, we have this framework underpinning it, right? This framework is here. How do we leverage that kind of passive attention that we've got from the eye due to our design? How do we leverage that to get people to look at what we want to look at? And we use contrast for that. Like I said, with the Acheron piece. Yeah. Same thing is going on here. We have value contrast. You know, we have this blown out pretty much to white. Yeah. It's not quite white, but it's pretty much there. Okay. Right next to really, really dark. Not quite black, but it's very, very dark, right? Big contrast. Geometric shape. You know, somewhat, and it's broken up a little bit. It's been obfuscated, which is a nice little touch. But yeah, we have like geometric shape, very simple, one outline next to much more complicated outline. So we've got contrast in value. Okay, we've got contrast in shape. We've got contrast in saturation. This is the most saturated part of the illustration. This blue, this red. And what is it next to? Like very desaturated blue in the sky here, and very desaturated kind of reddy grays in the skin here. Highest point of saturation contrast in the image. So we got saturation here. So we're stacking three big contrasts right at the part of the illustration that a lot of our flows are dedicated towards sending us. Okay. And yes, we do have some of these contrasts in other places, right? Look, there's value contrast right here. Yeah. There's contrast of shape right here. Yeah. There's all these other contrasts, but only here do we stack them this like severely. And that's why it holds its attention over everything else. Okay. Here, yeah, we've got a bit of saturation contrast, right? We've got a bit of value contrast. Okay. But all these shapes here are very, very soft and similar to each other. Like all of these rhythms, right? Bloop, 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 bloop. There's not much like countering to this. It's all kind of soft round shapes. So we don't have this. So it's got these two, but it doesn't have this. This has all three. Okay. Anywhere else that you can look, you're going to have one or other of these things like dropped out. You're either going to have like saturation contrast being a lot lower. You're going to have value contrast being a lot lower. You're going to have shape contrast being a lot lower, or an amalgamation of those in different angles. But all of them are like dialed up for here. Okay. And that is hung on the flow altogether. So there we go. I wanted to finish on this note. I did have some other paintings I wanted to talk about. Again, this one by Esben as well. But I think we can spill over and talk about those tomorrow. I've got some other things we can go over. And we can just sort of continue the discussion a little bit at the beginning of tomorrow's stream. But I think the main points that I wanted to make were here. And hopefully that journey from, you know, the letter L in graffiti and how we can manipulate that to make different forms, and then how those forms should ripple and flow into each other to set up the next letter and so on. How all of that sort of culminates in us understanding that the same things are being done in illustration and paintings to help set up and lead the eye to focal points. And then at those focal points, we spend our contrast currency to get people to look at that part of the illustration and ask questions and therefore understand the narrative, right? It's a bit of a journey, I know, but I think it is an important like underpinning and understanding for composition as a whole. So this stream will be saved on Twitch for 2 weeks, but it's also going to be on YouTube forever after this stream. If you click on the YouTube link on the About section of Twitch, you'll go to a playlist where this and all the other 48 streams that I've done in recent times are saved. This one will be saved there, so you can watch it back at any point and take those lessons in again. Like I said, try doing the graffiti stuff yourself. I think you'll surprise yourself with what you can see and what you can do. And it all starts with seeing and then doing and practicing, and eventually it will be something that makes its way into your artworks. You just got to do the first step, which we've already done because I've just shown you. All right, so first step complete, tick. All right. So tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll sort of pick up on this again. We'll kind of do a couple of the other paintings I wanted to look at for as different examples. And then, I'm not really sure what I'll do afterwards on stream. Maybe we'll continue with the kind of idea of doing a little graffiti piece, or something. I'll see how I feel about it tomorrow. But yeah, that being said, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everyone for like sticking around and going through that. I hope you found it interesting. If you do have any questions, just reach out on the Discord, Danish Celt. Thanks for the follow. Reach out on Discord, reach out on Instagram, anything like that if you've got any questions. But yeah, otherwise, save them for tomorrow. I'll answer them then. Have a great evening. Have a great dinner. We didn't even talk about food. Oh my God. All right. Peace out, everyone. Take care.